President Trump's mission to expand his executive power has found an ally in the Supreme Court. This week, the court handed the White House yet another victory by overturning a near century-old precedent. In a 6-3 ruling in the Trump versus Slaughter case, the court found that Trump's firing of Federal Trade Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter without cause was lawful. Trump fired Slaughter and the only other Democratic commissioner at the FTC, Alvaro Bedoya, just 2 months into his second term last year. And at the time, the administration didn't say they did anything wrong or that they weren't capable of carrying out their jobs or that they neglected their duties in some way, just that they weren't a good fit for his agenda. That's it. In their termination letters, Trump wrote, quote, "Your continued service on the FTC is inconsistent with my administration's priorities. Accordingly, I am removing you from my office, from office, pursuant to my authority under Article 2 of the Constitution." And this week, the Supreme Court essentially ruled that was valid. In the majority's opinion, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote that while it is up to the Senate to confirm presidential nominees, quote,
"Good to see you again. Jack here. Let's get started." After a crushing legal defeat over his attempt to fire FTC Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter without cause, Trump lost control in court and on social media, behaving as if federal law does not apply to him. The case exposed his pattern of political retaliation, and the judge's ruling was a total humiliation with no spin possible. Except there is one tiny problem with that approach. It is completely illegal. The Federal Trade Commission, like many independent agencies, has something called removal protections. These are statutory safeguards that say you cannot just fire commissioners without specific legal grounds.
Neither Congress nor the courts may saddle the president with those with whom he cannot work. Liberal Justice Sonia Sotomayor described the decision as grievously wrong and one that, quote, "reshapes the structure of government in a fundamental way by giving the president a power unknown even to the English crown against which the founders revolted, elevating him above his once co-equal branches." Listen, to be clear, this now gives the president far more power over those serving in a range of independent federal agencies that are supposed to make decisions on everything from our broadcasting and internet rules to our interest rates. And they don't do it based on politics. They do it based on expertise and the law, not on shifting political priorities. It is why many of these independent federal agencies are typically led by members of both parties. It is why Congress wanted agencies like the FTC to remain insulated from political influence when it was created back in 1914. And it is why this latest ruling from the highest court in the land and the potential chilling effect that could follow should concern anybody who believes in the checks and the balances of our government, no matter what political party you are from.
You need proof of inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance. Trump had absolutely none of that. But did he care? Of course not. He sent Slaughter an email saying her firing was inconsistent with administration priorities. That is not a legal reason. That is not grounds for removal. That is pure political retaliation dressed up in weak bureaucratic language. And Judge Ana Reyes, the federal judge assigned to the case, took one look at this nonsense and said absolutely not. She ruled that Trump's firing violated federal statutes designed to protect independent agencies from exactly this kind of political interference. Trump immediately filed an emergency appeal to the D.C. Circuit Court.
As former U.S. attorney and law professor Harry Litman puts it, quote, "You don't have to fire very many people to make everyone else flinch. That is the thumb on the scale toward partisan convenience and away from independent expertise. Exactly the people who built these agencies thought they had foreclosed for good." Joining me now is Rebecca Slaughter, who served as a commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission from 2018 until her firing in 2025 by President Donald Trump. This week, the Supreme Court ruled that her firing was lawful. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jacob. Happy July 4th.
You too. You have had a couple days now to sit with this ruling. How are you feeling? Were you surprised ultimately by what the court decided?
Well, I think the way I'd characterize it is that I was just profoundly disappointed. You read earlier from Justice Sotomayor's dissent that pointed out that not even kings, against which our founding fathers revolted, had the kind of power that the Supreme Court has now said the president is entitled to. And I think that's a really sad change in our fundamental structure of government, mostly for the American people, because the American people deserve a government that is fighting for them and not just for the powerful.
He probably thought his conservative judges would bail him out. He probably assumed that with the federal judiciary stacked with his appointees, he could get away with anything. Wrong again. The appeals court shot him down 2-1, with liberal judges Patricia Millett and Cornelia Pillard ruling against him. Only Judge Aileen Cannon, a Trump appointee, dissented, but she got outvoted. So now Trump is facing the reality that he cannot just fire whoever he wants whenever he wants. And his reaction is absolutely explosive. He went on Truth Social and started screaming about witch hunts and rogue judges blocking his America First agenda. He claimed the courts were engaged in deep state sabotage.
Well, that's the whole thing. The FTC's job is to protect consumers from deceptive practices, from monopolies. And all you got to do is step outside your front door to see that inflation is up and Americans are struggling to. I filled up gas this morning on my way here to afford gas for their cars and to put food on the table. What does it mean for American consumers specifically that the FTC is essentially no longer able to act independently? What are the ramifications?
Well, I think it's exactly what you're talking about. It is about whether the government, the institutions of government that Congress established to be a check on unfair and illegal business practices, on billionaire corporations and the billionaires who run them running wild, about whether they're going to be able to operate as a check or whether they're going to have to operate in fear of getting fired for failure to do a favor for the president's billionaire buddies. And I think I keep going back to the picture from the inauguration. That's what I can't get out of my mind,
right,
of the president standing surrounded not by heads of state, not by public servants, not even by his family.
He attacked the judges personally. He characterized the ruling as an assault on his authority. It was classic Trump. Deflection, projection, and complete refusal to accept that he had done something wrong. But let us be absolutely clear about what is happening here. This is not a witch hunt. These are not rogue judges. This is basic rule of law functioning exactly as it is supposed to function. The removal protections for FTC commissioners exist for a reason. Independent agencies are supposed to be independent. The FTC is not supposed to be Trump's personal enforcement arm. It is supposed to protect consumers and enforce antitrust laws without political interference. The timing of all this is absolutely devastating for Trump.
But surrounded by the executives of the most powerful corporations in America. And what I thought as an FTC commissioner is not only, whoa, that's weird, but also we are currently in litigation against almost every one of those people's companies. And what will it mean if the president says to the FTC commissioners, I want you to make this case go away because this company is helping to build my ballroom or donated to my inauguration? In the past, what it would mean would be nothing, because the way the FTC was structured, commissioners were obligated to follow the law, follow the facts, follow their oath, which is to the Constitution and the laws of the United States, and not follow out of blind loyalty to the president. And they couldn't be fired for failure to follow an illegal order. And now they can be. And that is a massive, massive change when it comes to you, the American people's ability to trust that government is working for you.
What is your level of worry or fear about the chilling effect that it could have, not just on the FTC, but there's 20 independent, I think more than 20 independent federal agencies that are affected by this ruling. Is there another agency that you are the most concerned about?
He has been trying to gut regulatory agencies across the board during his second term. He has gone after the National Labor Relations Board, the Merit Systems Protection Board, the Consumer Product Safety Commission. He has basically targeted any agency that might slow down his deregulatory agenda. He has even tried to challenge Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook's position. This guy wants total control over every aspect of government. Constitutional protections be damned. But this court ruling just put a massive roadblock in front of his authoritarian steamroller. If he cannot fire independent commissioners without legal cause, then he cannot just purge everyone who disagrees with his policies. That means actual oversight, actual independence, actual checks and balances. All the things Trump hates most about democracy. What is really getting under his skin is that this connects to all his other legal problems. The Hegseth boat strike scandals, his immigration executive overreach, all the lawsuits piling up against his administration. It is all part of the same pattern. Trump thinks he is above the law, and the courts keep proving him wrong. Every single time he tries to exceed his constitutional authority, federal judges slap him down. And every time that happens, he gets more unhinged on social media. The political implications here are massive. Republicans are already worried about the 2026 midterms, and having a president who constantly attacks federal judges is not exactly great messaging. When your guy is ranting about deep state sabotage every time he loses in court, that does not project strength. It projects weakness and desperation. Democrats are absolutely loving this, by the way. They get to point to concrete examples of Trump trying to violate federal law and getting shut down by the courts. It is like Christmas morning for their opposition research teams. Every Trump tantrum on Truth Social becomes another campaign ad showing he cannot handle losing in court. But here is what is really scary about this whole situation. Trump's response to losing in court is not to accept the ruling and move on. It is to attack the entire judicial system as illegitimate. He is essentially telling his supporters that federal courts cannot be trusted, that judges are part of some deep state conspiracy against him. That is not just politically dangerous. That is dangerous for democracy itself. When you undermine public faith in the courts, you undermine the entire legal system. And when people stop believing in the legal system, they start looking for other ways to settle disputes. That is how you get political violence, civil unrest, maybe even worse. Trump is playing with fire here, and he either does not understand the consequences or does not care. The Rebecca Slaughter case might seem like a small thing, just one commissioner at one agency, but it is actually a perfect example of how our constitutional system is supposed to work. Independent agencies provide oversight and enforcement that protects the public from corporate abuse and government overreach. When Trump tries to gut those protections, the courts step in to stop him. That is not deep state sabotage. That is democracy working exactly as designed. Too bad nobody can explain that to Trump in terms he would understand. But this FTC situation is about way more than just one fired commissioner. This is about Trump's entire second-term strategy to dismantle independent government oversight and how the courts are systematically destroying his plans one ruling at a time. The real story that most people are missing is that when Trump fired Slaughter, he was not just getting rid of someone who disagreed with him. He was testing whether he could completely bypass congressional intent and judicial precedent to reshape federal agencies according to his personal whims. The FTC was created with specific removal protections precisely to prevent political interference in consumer protection and antitrust enforcement. Congress did not want presidents firing commissioners just because they did not like their decisions. But Trump's legal team apparently thought they could find some loophole or constitutional argument that would let him ignore those protections. They probably figured that with a conservative Supreme Court and Trump-appointed judges throughout the federal system, they could get away with pushing the boundaries of executive power. Except they completely miscalculated how federal law actually works. Even conservative judges do not like it when presidents blatantly violate statutory requirements, especially when those requirements protect the independence of federal agencies. Judge Reyes's ruling was absolutely devastating in its simplicity. The law says you need inefficiency, neglect, or malfeasance to fire an FTC commissioner. Trump's email to Slaughter cited none of those things. Instead, it just said her positions were inconsistent with administration priorities. That is not a legal standard. That is just political disagreement. The judge basically said, if you want to fire someone for political reasons, change the law first. You cannot just ignore the law because you do not like it. Now let me talk about Trump's emergency appeal to the D.C. Circuit Court. This was probably his biggest mistake in this whole saga. By rushing to the appeals court, he basically guaranteed that this case would get maximum attention and set a precedent that limits his power going forward. If he had just accepted the lower court ruling, it might have stayed under the radar. But by appealing, he turned this into a major constitutional showdown that he ended up losing spectacularly. The 2-to-1 ruling against him is particularly brutal because it shows even Trump-appointed judges are not willing to rubber stamp his power grabs. Judge Cannon dissented, which is not surprising given her conservative track record. But Judges Millett and Pillard formed a solid majority that rejected Trump's arguments completely. That sends a message to every other federal agency that they cannot count on the courts to bail them out when they violate removal protections. But here is where it gets really wild. This is not just about the FTC. Trump has been systematically trying to purge independent agencies across the entire federal government. He has gone after the National Labor Relations Board, trying to fire members who support workers' rights. He has targeted the Merit Systems Protection Board, which oversees federal employee rights. He has even tried to challenge Consumer Product Safety Commission appointments. The guy is basically trying to turn every independent agency into an extension of the White House political operation. And that is not even counting his attempts to control the Federal Reserve. Trump has been openly pressuring Fed Governor Lisa Cook to resign, clearly hoping he can replace her with someone more sympathetic to his economic policies. Never mind that Fed independence has been a cornerstone of American monetary policy for decades. Trump wants loyalists everywhere, even in positions that are supposed to be insulated from political pressure. The pattern here is absolutely clear. Trump sees independent agencies as obstacles to his agenda rather than important checks on executive power. He does not understand or does not care that these agencies exist to protect the public from exactly the kind of political interference he is trying to impose. Consumer protection, workers' rights, antitrust enforcement, financial regulation. All of these areas require some degree of independence from political pressure to function effectively. But Trump's approach is just fire everyone who disagrees and replace them with loyalists. Except the law does not allow that, which is why he keeps losing in court. And every time he loses, he gets more desperate and more unhinged in his attacks on the judicial system. His Truth Social meltdown after the Slaughter ruling is a perfect example. Instead of accepting that he overstepped his legal authority, he immediately started screaming about witch hunts and deep state sabotage. He called the judges rogue and claimed they were blocking his America First agenda. But here's the thing. These judges are not blocking his agenda because they disagree with it politically. They are blocking specific actions because those actions violate federal law. That is a distinction Trump either cannot or will not understand. In his mind, any legal obstacle to his power is automatically illegitimate. Courts that rule against him are corrupt. Laws that limit his authority are deep state conspiracies. Independent agencies that do not follow his orders are part of some resistance movement. It is a completely authoritarian mindset that sees any check on presidential power as an attack on democracy itself. The political consequences of this mentality are already becoming clear. Republicans in Congress are getting nervous about defending Trump's constant attacks on federal judges. They know that undermining public confidence in the courts creates problems that go way beyond any individual case. When people stop trusting the legal system, they start looking for other ways to resolve disputes. And that is a recipe for political chaos. Democrats, meanwhile, are using Trump's judicial tantrums as evidence that he is unfit for office. Every time he loses in court and then attacks the judges, they get another example of his authoritarian tendencies to use in campaign ads. The Rebecca Slaughter case is perfect for this because it shows Trump trying to violate federal law and then having a public meltdown when the courts stop him. But the bigger issue is what this means for the rule of law in America. Independent agencies exist for good reasons. They provide expertise and continuity that pure political appointees cannot match. They enforce laws consistently regardless of which party controls the White House. They protect the public from corporate abuse and government overreach. When you gut these agencies or turn them into political tools, you undermine the entire regulatory system that protects Americans from everything from unsafe products to financial fraud. Trump does not seem to understand or care about any of that. He just sees obstacles to his personal agenda that need to be eliminated. And when the courts tell him he cannot eliminate those obstacles, he attacks the courts too. It is a pattern of behavior that threatens the entire constitutional system of checks and balances. The Slaughter ruling might be just one case, but it represents something much bigger. The question of whether we still have a government of laws or whether we are moving toward a system where presidential power is essentially unlimited. The court said we still have a government of laws. Trump's response suggests he fundamentally disagrees with that principle. This whole FTC situation reveals everything you need to know about Trump's second-term strategy and why it is completely falling apart in the courts. First, Trump literally does not understand how federal agencies are supposed to work. The guy thinks he can fire anyone anywhere for any reason just because he is president. But that is not how independent agencies function. Congress created removal protections for commissioners specifically to prevent political interference in regulatory enforcement. You cannot just fire someone because you disagree with their policy positions. You need actual legal grounds like inefficiency, neglect, or malfeasance. Trump had none of that when he fired Rebecca Slaughter. His email basically said she was fired because her views were inconsistent with administration priorities. That is not a legal standard. That is just political retaliation. Judge Reyes saw right through it and ruled the firing violated federal law. Then Trump appealed and got smacked down again by the D.C. Circuit Court. 2 courts, 2 losses, same basic problem. He tried to ignore the law because it was inconvenient for his political agenda. This is not rocket science. If you want to fire independent commissioners for political reasons, change the law first. You cannot just pretend legal protections do not exist. Second, this is part of a much bigger pattern of Trump trying to gut independent oversight across the entire federal government. The FTC case is not isolated. He has been systematically targeting every agency that might interfere with his deregulatory agenda. The National Labor Relations Board, the Merit Systems Protection Board, the Consumer Product Safety Commission. He has tried to purge all of them. He is even going after Fed Governor Lisa Cook because she will not rubber stamp his economic policies. The guy wants total control over every aspect of government regulation. Constitutional protections be damned. But here is the problem. Independent agencies exist for good reasons. They provide expertise and continuity that pure political appointees cannot match. They enforce laws consistently, regardless of which party controls the White House. When you turn them into political tools, you undermine the entire regulatory system that protects Americans from corporate abuse and government overreach. Trump sees this as deep state resistance to his America First agenda. Actually, it is just basic rule of law functioning exactly as designed. Independent agencies like the FTC were specifically created to be insulated from political pressure because that is how effective regulation works. When commissioners have to worry about getting fired for making unpopular decisions, they stop making the right decisions for consumers and workers. Trump either does not understand this, or he does not care about the consequences of politicizing everything. Trump's reaction to losing in court is absolutely unhinged and politically destructive. Instead of accepting that he overstepped his legal authority, he immediately went on Truth Social to attack the entire judicial system. He called the judges rogue and claimed they were part of some deep state conspiracy to block his agenda. This is not normal presidential behavior. When you lose in court, you either accept the ruling or appeal through proper legal channels. You do not attack the integrity of federal judges and undermine public confidence in the legal system. But that is exactly what Trump does every time a court rules against him. It is the same pattern we have seen with the Hegseth boat strike cases, his immigration executive overreach, all the lawsuits challenging his unconstitutional actions. He loses in court, then attacks the courts as illegitimate. This creates massive political problems for Republicans who have to defend his tantrums. It also gives Democrats perfect campaign material showing Trump's authoritarian tendencies. But the bigger issue is what this does to public trust in democratic institutions. When people stop believing in the courts, they start looking for other ways to resolve disputes. That is how you get political violence and civil unrest. Trump is playing with fire by constantly attacking judges as corrupt whenever they rule against him. This is not just bad politics. It is dangerous for democracy. This ruling sets a precedent that is going to haunt Trump for the rest of his presidency. The D.C. Circuit decision does not just apply to the FTC. It sends a clear message to every federal agency that courts will not tolerate violations of removal protections. Trump's legal team probably thought they could push the boundaries of executive power and get away with it because of conservative judges. Wrong. Even Trump-appointed judges do not like it when presidents blatantly ignore federal statutes. The Rebecca Slaughter case is now established precedent that other agency commissioners can cite when Trump tries to fire them for political reasons. His entire strategy of purging independent oversight just got a lot harder to execute. Every future firing attempt is going to face the same legal scrutiny that destroyed his case against Slaughter. That means Trump's deregulatory agenda is going to move a lot slower than he planned. Instead of quickly replacing commissioners with loyalists, he is going to have to work within existing legal frameworks or spend years fighting in court. And we have already seen how those court fights turn out for him. The real tragedy here is that Trump is doing this entirely to himself. Nobody forced him to fire Slaughter without legal cause. Nobody made him send that ridiculous email citing administration priorities instead of statutory requirements. He could have built a legitimate case for removal if he had actual evidence of misconduct or incompetence, but he was too impatient and too arrogant to follow proper procedures. Now he is stuck with a commissioner he cannot remove and legal precedent that limits his power going forward. Let us talk about what this means for the 2026 midterms. Republicans are already facing a tough political environment, with Trump's controversial policies creating massive Democratic opposition. Having their president constantly attacking federal judges and losing basic legal challenges makes them look weak and out of control. When your guy is ranting about deep state conspiracies every time he loses in court, that does not project strength. It projects desperation and incompetence. The irony is that Trump probably could have achieved most of his regulatory goals through normal legal processes. It would have taken longer and required more political skill, but it would have been sustainable and legally defensible. Instead, he chose the authoritarian route of trying to fire everyone who disagreed with him. And now that strategy is completely falling apart because courts actually enforce the law. This whole situation perfectly illustrates the difference between being a businessman and being president. In business, Trump could fire whoever he wanted for whatever reason. As president, he has to follow constitutional procedures and respect statutory protections. He either does not understand that difference or does not care about it. Either way, it is creating massive problems for his presidency and his party. The next time Trump tries to fire an independent agency commissioner, every lawyer in Washington is going to be pointing to the Slaughter precedent. Good luck explaining to voters why your president keeps losing basic legal challenges because he refuses to follow the law. But at least we are getting some entertaining Truth Social meltdowns out of it. Always fun to watch a grown man have public tantrums every time reality does not match his authoritarian fantasies. It will be interesting to see what agency he tries to purge next and how spectacularly that fails in court. Because the pattern is clear. Trump overreaches. The courts push back. Trump throws a fit on social media, and nothing actually changes except his blood pressure. The Slaughter ruling is just the latest example of a president who thinks he is above the law, discovering that the Constitution and federal statutes still matter. The courts are enforcing the law against Trump's political interference, and his Truth Social rants can't change that reality. As he keeps testing the limits of his power, the judiciary keeps slapping him down, a cycle that will continue.